The world mistook silence for surrender. They thought silence meant I was empty. They looked at me and decided the story for themselves. They always do. When I stopped explaining, they called it weakness. When I stopped defending myself, they called it defeat. When I stopped reacting, they whispered the same lie to each other until it felt true. He has nothing left. They said it with confidence, with relief, with that subtle hunger people get when they believe someone beneath them is finally finished. They mistook my stillness for collapse. They mistook my restraint for fear. They mistook my silence for surrender, and I let them, because loud people are reckless, and reckless people reveal everything. They talked, they judged, they speculated. They filled the empty space I left behind with their own assumptions, their own cruelty, their own insecurity. They projected their weakness onto my quiet. They projected their fear onto my calm. And they never once stopped to ask why I wasn't speaking. They just assumed I couldn't. They assumed I was broken. They assumed I was ashamed. They assumed I was finished. He doesn't fight back. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't even look angry. They laughed at that. They found comfort in that, because people only mock what they believe can't hurt them. They spoke louder. I listened longer. Every word they threw into the air landed somewhere. Every careless sentence revealed a motive. Every joke exposed a wound they thought no one could see. They spoke because they needed to be seen. I stayed silent because I was watching. You see, silence is uncomfortable to people who need validation. Silence feels like judgment to people who survive on applause. Silence feels dangerous to people who lie to themselves for a living. So they filled it. They filled it with mockery, with half-truths, with betrayal disguised as honesty. They smiled to my face, then spoke my name differently when I was gone. And when I didn't confront them, they grew bolder. When I didn't react, they grew careless. They mistook my patience for permission. They said things they would have never said if they thought I was still standing. They did things they would have never done if they believed I was still watching. But I was. I saw who respected me only when I was useful. I saw who stayed quiet when my name was dragged through the dirt. I saw who enjoyed the distance a little too much. And I said nothing. Not because I didn't feel it, not because it didn't hurt, but because pain has a way of sharpening the mind when you stop screaming through it. Make no mistake, it burned. It burned every time someone dismissed my silence as incompetence. Every time they spoke over me like my presence no longer mattered. Every time they reduced my restraint into a punchline. He used to be something. He's fallen off. He's not the same anymore. They were right about one thing. I wasn't the same, but not in the way they thought. They thought I was shrinking. They thought I was fading. They thought the fire had gone out. What they didn't understand is that fire doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it learns. Sometimes it burns so deep it stops needing to announce itself. They wanted me loud because loud is predictable. Loud can be interrupted. Loud can be challenged. Silence can't. Silence forces people to fill the gaps themselves. And what they put there says more about them than it ever could about me. So I let them talk. I let them build their version of me. Weak. Defeated, harmless. I let them repeat it until they believed it. He has nothing left. They said it when I walked away instead of arguing. They said it when I didn't defend my name. They said it when I refused to beg for understanding. They couldn't imagine a world where silence was chosen, because they've never had the strength to choose it. To them, silence only exists when someone has been stripped of their voice. They don't understand the kind of control it takes to keep your mouth shut while the world misjudges you. To stand there, unmoving, unreacted, while people test your limits just to see if you still have any. They called it passivity. They were wrong. Passivity is avoidance. What I was doing was observation. I was measuring people by how they behaved when they thought there were no consequences. I was watching who grew cruel when they thought I was powerless, who grew arrogant when they thought I was irrelevant, who grew honest only when they believed I could no longer respond. Silence is a mirror, and they hated what they saw. They saw themselves without opposition, without restraint, without accountability, and they didn't look good, so they leaned into the lie. They told themselves I was finished because it made their actions easier to live with, because it excused their betrayal, because it justified their indifference. If I was already broken, then they didn't have to feel guilty for breaking me further. If I was already nothing, then their silence toward me felt earned, so they repeated it again. He has nothing left. But here's the truth they never considered. I wasn't silent because I was empty. I was silent because I was full of memory, full of awareness, full of a patience they couldn't comprehend. I wasn't reacting because reactions are currency. And I wasn't about to make them rich off my pain. I wasn't explaining because explanations invite debate. And my existence was never meant to be negotiated. I wasn't fighting back because battles reveal your strategy too early. And I wasn't defending myself because the truth doesn't need protection from lies that collapse under their own weight. They wanted noise. I gave them nothing. And in that nothing, they revealed everything. They revealed who needed to feel superior, who needed to feel right, who needed someone beneath them to justify their own stagnation. They revealed how quickly respect disappears when silence replaces usefulness, how loyalty dissolves when attention fades, how fragile morality becomes when no one is watching. And still I said nothing, because silence isn't absence. Silence is pressure. It presses people until their true nature leaks out. It forces them to speak more than they should, to act sooner than they should, to expose themselves without realizing it. They thought my silence meant I had surrendered control. In reality, I had taken it. They were reacting. I was calculating. They were loud. I was learning. They were certain. I was prepared. And the calm they mocked, that wasn't peace. That was restraint. That was the pause before judgment. The stillness before consequence. The breath before something irreversible begins. They stood there, confident, believing the story they told themselves. That I was done. That I was finished. That I had nothing left, and I let them believe it. Because the most dangerous moment is when someone fights back. It's when they stop explaining. It's when they stop proving. It's when they stop reacting and start watching. So let them remember this moment. The moment they mistook silence for surrender. The moment they mistook patience for weakness. The moment they mistook stillness for defeat, because this is where it began, not with noise, not with anger, not with revenge, but with silence. And silence, when chosen, is never empty. It is waiting. When they thought I was empty, I was watching. They thought the silence meant absence. They thought when I stopped speaking, I stopped existing. That when my voice faded, my awareness followed it into the dark. They were wrong. Silence didn't erase me. It elevated me. It lifted me out of the noise and placed me somewhere higher, somewhere colder, somewhere clear. While they were busy talking, I was watching. While they were busy winning, I was measuring. While they were busy celebrating, I was learning exactly who they were when they believed no one important was paying attention. They forgot I was there. They forgot I was listening. That's the danger of arrogance. It makes people careless. It convinces them the story is already over. They believed they had won because I didn't resist. They believed the battle was finished because I didn't bleed loudly. So they relaxed. And when people relax, the mask slips. They laughed a little harder. They spoke a little freer. They said the things they had always wanted to say. They stopped filtering their cruelty, stopped hiding their envy, stopped pretending their loyalty was real. I watched respect evaporate in real time, watched admiration turn into entitlement, watched people who once needed me begin to talk about me like an inconvenience. And still I said nothing, because silence is a vantage point. From silence you see patterns. From silence you hear truth beneath tone. From silence you notice who changes when the power dynamic shifts. They spoke as if I was already gone, as if my presence no longer mattered, as if my silence was permission to rewrite history. So they rewrote it. They made themselves heroes. They made me irrelevant. They made my restraint into proof of their superiority. And in doing so, they revealed everything. They forgot I was there. They forgot I was listening. People always do. They forget the quiet one is the most dangerous one in the room. Because the quiet one isn't busy defending an image. The quiet one is studying behavior. I saw who grew cruel the moment they felt safe, who enjoyed the absence of resistance a little too much, who mistook dominance for character. I saw jokes that weren't jokes, comments wrapped in laughter but sharpened with resentment, smiles that didn't reach the eyes once they thought I wasn't watching. I saw the way their posture changed when my name came up, the way their voice hardened, then softened, depending on the audience. The way truth became flexible when accountability disappeared. They didn't realize they were confessing, because when people think they've won, they stop pretending. Predators celebrate too early when they think the hunt is over. They grow loud, they grow sloppy. They show their teeth before the kill is complete. I watched them do the same. They toasted victories they hadn't earned. They took credit for strength they borrowed. They laughed about my silence like it was a punchline. He's done. He's finished. He doesn't matter anymore. They said it with relief, because nothing is more threatening than someone you can't read. And nothing is more comforting than believing that threat is gone. So they convinced themselves I was empty. Empty of anger, empty of awareness, empty of resolve. They were wrong about all of it. Silence didn't hollow me out. It stripped me down to what was essential. While they were busy performing, I was observing. While they were busy posturing, I was dissecting motive. While they were busy speaking, I was understanding. Understanding who needed approval, who feared irrelevance, who wore confidence like armor because underneath it was fear. They exposed their insecurities without realizing it. Every insult was a reflection. Every dismissal was a confession. The louder they spoke, the clearer it became. They forgot I was there. They forgot I was listening. I watched alliances shift when convenience demanded it. Watched loyalty bend under pressure. Watched principles disappear the moment they became inconvenient. And the more they talked, the more predictable they became. Predictable people are easy to read, easy to manipulate, easy to dismantle. They didn't notice how calm I was. They mistook calm for indifference. They mistook stillness for defeat. But calm is not the absence of emotion. Calm is control. It is the moment you stop needing to prove anything. The moment you stop reacting to bait. The moment you stop wasting energy on people who already told you who they are. I wasn't ignoring them. I was cataloging them. Every laugh, every side glance, every careless word. I noted who spoke differently depending on who was listening. Who changed their values to fit the room. Who needed me small so they could feel tall. And I said nothing. Because silence makes people reckless. They grow bold when they think no one will challenge them. They grow honest when they think the audience is gone. They grow cruel when they believe there are no consequences. That's when the truth comes out. Not when people are pressured, not when they're threatened, but when they think they're safe. They thought they were safe. They thought the danger had passed. They thought the story had ended. So they revealed the parts of themselves they usually keep hidden. The envy behind the compliments, the resentment behind the smiles, the fear behind the arrogance. I watched it all, and I didn't flinch, because I wasn't watching to react. I was watching to understand who would fold under pressure, who would betray first, who would speak loudest to hide their own weakness. They thought my silence meant I wasn't paying attention. They forgot I was there. They forgot I was listening. And in forgetting, they gave me clarity. Clarity about who deserved distance. Clarity about who thrived only when I was diminished. Clarity about who needed my silence to feel powerful. That clarity changed everything. Because once you see people clearly, you stop hoping they'll be different. You stop waiting for apologies. You stop expecting fairness. You adjust, you adapt, you rise. They were celebrating an ending that hadn't happened yet. Laughing in the dark, convinced the threat was gone. Like predators dancing before the hunt is finished. Like kings drinking before the war is over. They mistook patience for weakness. And that mistake cost them everything they didn't know they were about to lose. Because while they were talking, I was remembering. I was remembering every slight dismissed as a joke. Every silence that should have been loyalty. Every moment they chose comfort over character. I was remembering who stayed quiet when it mattered, who spoke up only when it was safe, who vanished when standing beside me required courage. Silence sharpened my vision. It removed the noise, the excuses, the illusions, and what was left was truth, cold, unfiltered, undeniable. They forgot I was there. They forgot I was listening, and in that forgetting, they handed me something invaluable. Not anger, not revenge, understanding. Understanding is power. Because once you understand people, you no longer fear them. You no longer chase their approval. You no longer waste energy trying to be seen by those who are blind by choice. You move differently. You stand differently. You wait. And waiting, when done with intention, is not weakness. It is preparation. So let them believe I was empty. Let them believe the silence meant surrender. Let them believe the battle was already won. Because while they were celebrating, I was watching. And watching is how you learn exactly where to strike. They forgot I was there. They forgot I was listening. They won't forget again. Betrayal speaks loudest when you say nothing. Betrayal doesn't arrive screaming. It doesn't kick the door down. It doesn't announce itself with thunder. It whispers. It leans in close, smiles while it sharpens the blade. It calls you family while loosening its grip. That's how it happened. Not all at once, not dramatically, slowly, quietly. One friend stopped calling. One ally hesitated when my name was mentioned. One mentor chose comfort over truth. One lover learned how easy it was to look away. No explosions, no confrontations, just absence. Just distance. Just that familiar feeling of reaching for someone who no longer reaches back. And that hurt more than anything loud ever could. Because when pain isn't acknowledged, it doesn't leave. It settles. It sits in the chest, in the throat, in the space where trust used to live. They didn't stab me in the front. They stepped back. They watched. They let things happen. They nodded along while my name was rewritten in quieter rooms. And I felt it. Every hesitation, every delayed response. Every moment where loyalty should have spoken and didn't. Silence makes betrayal echo, because there's no distraction from it, no argument to hide behind. No drama to dilute the truth, just the sound of people choosing themselves over you. And still, I said nothing. I didn't confront them. I didn't ask why. I didn't demand explanations. I let them continue. Because confrontation gives people a chance to perform, to justify, to manipulate the narrative. Silence doesn't. Silence removes the safety net. Without resistance, people reveal who they are willing to be when they think there's no cost, and they revealed themselves, one by one. The friend who joked about loyalty but vanished when it required courage. The ally who praised my strength until it threatened theirs. The mentor who taught integrity until practicing it became inconvenient. The lover who promised permanence until staying meant discomfort. They didn't turn on me loudly. They just didn't turn toward me. And that's the kind of betrayal that cuts deepest. Because you can't argue with absence. You can't debate silence. You can't fight something that refuses to admit it exists. They avoided eye contact, changed the subject, acted like nothing was happening. And when I didn't react, they mistook restraint for ignorance. They thought I didn't notice. They thought I didn't feel it. They thought if they stayed quiet enough, the truth would disappear. They forgot I was listening. They forgot silence hears everything. I watched loyalty turn conditional, watched affection become strategic. Watched respect evaporate the moment it became inconvenient, and I learned something important. Betrayal isn't always someone choosing your enemy. Sometimes it's someone choosing comfort. Sometimes it's someone choosing to stay neutral when neutrality benefits them and destroys you. Sometimes it's someone choosing not to see. That kind of betrayal doesn't scream. It shrugs. It looks away. It tells itself a story where no one is really at fault, and silence forces that story to collapse. Because when you don't confront people, they don't get to lie to your face. They lie to themselves instead, and that's when the truth surfaces. They justified their absence, rationalized their inaction, minimized their role. He'll be fine. It's not my problem. I don't want to get involved. Those sentences said everything. They didn't need my anger to expose them. They did it on their own. Pain is sharper when it's unacknowledged, when no one says sorry, when no one admits wrong. When no one even recognizes what they took from you. Because then you're not just grieving the betrayal, you're grieving the illusion you had of them. You're grieving who you thought they were. And that hurts. It hurts realizing the people you trusted needed you strong, but not stronger than them. Needed you present, but not inconvenient. Needed you loyal, but only one way. So I stopped asking for honesty and started listening to behavior. Behavior doesn't lie. Behavior doesn't care about intentions. Behavior shows you exactly where you stand, and where I stood was clear. I stood alone, not because I was abandoned loudly, but because I was abandoned quietly. They stopped defending me in rooms I wasn't in, stopped correcting lies because it was easier not to, stopped standing beside me because standing required risk. And the moment I realized that, something changed. I stopped expecting them to be different. I stopped hoping silence would wake them up. I stopped romanticizing loyalty that only existed when it was easy. I didn't confront them. I let them continue, and they exposed themselves completely. Every time they chose convenience over character. Every time they avoided discomfort at my expense. Every time they watched the narrative twist and did nothing. They showed me who they were when no one was forcing them to choose. Silence removes excuses. When you don't argue, people can't hide behind misunderstanding. When you don't react, people can't blame emotion. When you do confront, people can't pretend it was a mistake. All that's left is intention, and their intentions were clear. They didn't need to betray me actively. They just needed to stop protecting me, and that was enough. I felt bitterness rise, I won't lie. There were nights when the quiet was too loud, when the absence replayed itself on a loop, when every memory felt tainted by what I now knew. But I didn't break, I controlled it. Because bitterness without control turns into weakness. And I wasn't going to give them that, too. Instead, I turned the pain into clarity. I realized something most people never do. People do betray you because you're weak. They betray you because staying loyal requires strength they don't have. They don't abandon you because you deserve it. They abandon you because standing with you would cost them something. And when silence removes the pressure to pretend, they choose themselves. Every time. I didn't confront them, I let them continue. And in continuing, they erased any doubt I had left. No dramatic ending. No final argument, just understanding. Cold, clean, unavoidable. I understood that loyalty spoken is cheap. Loyalty practiced is rare. That most people want the image of being good without the burden of acting right. And I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. Because silence had already given me the truth. They didn't need to say it. Their absence said enough. Their inaction said enough. Their comfort said enough. And that truth hardened something inside me, not into hatred, into precision. Because once you see betrayal clearly, you stop bleeding from it. You stop reopening the wound. You close it. You scar over. And scars don't hurt the way open wounds do. They remind you. They remind you who not to trust, who not to wait for, who not to give the benefit of the doubt ever again. I didn't confront them. I didn't chase closure. I let them continue, and in doing so, I freed myself, because I no longer needed their honesty to move forward. Their silence had already told me everything. Betrayal spoke loudest when I said nothing, and I heard it all. The loneliness that rewired me. Loneliness doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in. It fills the gaps between moments, the silence after conversations that never come, the space where voices used to live. At first, it feels temporary, like something you can outwait. Like something that will pass if you stay strong long enough. I told myself that. I told myself this was just a phase, that people would return, that explanations would arrive, that the silence around me was accidental. It was intentional. And once that truth settled in, loneliness stopped being quiet. It became loud, not with sound, with thoughts that had nowhere else to go. I was alone with my mind, and my mind did not go easy on me. Every memory replayed without mercy. Every conversation re-examined. Every moment I wondered if I had misread loyalty, if I had asked for too much, if I had been too intense, too quiet, too much of something people didn't know how to handle. Loneliness strips you of distraction. There's no audience, no validation, no one to interrupt the questions, so they come, relentless. Who am I when no one is watching? What am I worth when no one chooses me? Was I ever respected or merely tolerated? Those questions don't ask politely, they interrogate, and when there are no witnesses, they get cruel. I replayed failures like evidence in a trial where I was both judge and defendant. I replayed moments of trust and wondered how I missed the signs. I replayed promises and tried to understand when they stopped meaning anything. And the rage came, not outward, inward. That's the most dangerous kind. Rage that has nowhere to go doesn't explode. It corrodes. It turns every thought sharp. It turns every memory into a weapon. I blamed myself for trusting too much, for expecting loyalty in a world that trades it cheaply, for believing silence would be understood instead of exploited. I questioned my worth, not dramatically, quietly, in the small hours of the mind where doubt whispers instead of screams. Maybe I deserved it. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe there was something wrong with me that everyone else could see. Loneliness has a way of convincing you that absence is evidence. Evidence that you failed. Evidence that you miscalculated your value. Evidence that the world moved on because you were never essential. And there was no one there to argue with that voice, no one to interrupt it, no one to remind me who I was before I started doubting myself. Just me and the echo, a mind echoing without witnesses, thoughts bouncing off empty walls, questions returning unanswered. It was exhausting. There were days I didn't recognize myself. Days when the person in my head sounded smaller, weaker, tired. I hated that version of me, hated how quiet he was, hated how much he second-guessed every thought, hated how he kept asking for permission from people who weren't there. That hatred scared me, because it meant I was turning inward with the same cruelty others had shown me. Loneliness doesn't just isolate you from people, it isolates you from yourself. I felt fractured. One part of me still believed I was meant for more. Another part whispered that this was all I would ever be. Stuck between potential and doubt, between memory and reality. And the longer I stayed there, the sharper it got, like a blade sharpening itself in darkness. No fire, no noise, just pressure, repetition, every thought honing the edge, every doubt grinding away softness. At first it hurt. Every pass of the stone against the blade hurt. Every realization hurt. The realization that some people never cared as deeply as I did. The realization that loyalty isn't common, it's chosen. The realization that silence doesn't protect you from abandonment, it exposes you to it. Loneliness forced me to confront something I had avoided for a long time. I had built my identity around how others saw me, around being reliable, being strong for others, being the one who didn't need much in return. And when they were gone, that identity collapsed. There was nothing left to perform, nothing left to prove, no one left to impress. And that terrified me, because without witnesses, there were no roles to play, just truth. And truth doesn't care about comfort. I asked myself questions I never wanted to answer. If no one ever comes back, who are you? If no one validates you, do you still stand tall? If no one remembers what you did for them, does it still matter? Those questions burned. But they also cleared something out. They burned away the need to be seen, the need to be approved, the need to be chosen by people who only chose me when it was easy. Loneliness began to teach me, not gently, ruthlessly. It taught me that relying on others to define me was a weakness I never acknowledged, that expecting recognition was a chain disguised as hope, that waiting for people to return was a form of self-betrayal. And slowly something shifted. The pain didn't disappear, it changed shape. Loneliness stopped hurting and started hardening. The questions didn't go away, they sharpened. Instead of asking, why wasn't I enough? They became, why did I give so much to people who gave so little? Instead of asking, what's wrong with me? They became, why did I ignore the signs? Instead of asking, will they come back? They became, why would I ever need them to? That's when I felt it. The internal fracture sealing, the cracks turning into lines of reinforcement. Loneliness stopped being an enemy. It became a forge. Every moment alone forced me to build something inside myself that no one could take, self-definition. I stopped explaining my silence in my own head, stopped apologizing for my distance, stopped shrinking my presence even when no one was around. I stood differently, even alone. I spoke to myself differently, with less doubt, less softness, more clarity. Loneliness stripped me of illusions. The illusion that people stay because you deserve it. The illusion that loyalty is guaranteed. The illusion that being good is enough to be protected. What replaced those illusions was something heavier, something real, self-reliance. I realized something dangerous. If I could survive this alone, the doubt, the echo, the isolation, then I didn't need anyone to validate my strength. And that realization was terrifying and empowering, because the moment you stop needing witnesses, you stop being controlled. Loneliness rewired me. It rewired how I saw people, how I saw loyalty, how I saw myself. I stopped fearing being alone, because I had already been there. And it hadn't destroyed me, it had sharpened me, like a blade left too long in the dark, coming out refined, unforgiving, precise. Loneliness didn't make me weak, it removed my dependencies. It didn't silence me, it taught me how to stand without noise. And when I finally looked at myself, really looked, I didn't see someone abandoned. I saw someone unburdened. Unburdened by expectations, unburdened by approval, unburdened by the need to be understood by people who never tried to understand me in the first place. Loneliness stopped hurting and became armor, quiet, unseen, unbreakable. And from that point on, I was no longer afraid of being alone. Because I knew exactly what loneliness turns into if you let it finish its work. Silence as a weapon, not a wound. Silence is not what they think it is. They think it's damage. They think it's loss. They think it's what remains after something inside you breaks. They're wrong. Silence is not a wound. It's discipline. It's the moment you stop bleeding in public. The moment you stop handing your enemies proof that their words reached you. The moment you decide your energy is too valuable to spill on people who don't deserve it. I learned that the hard way. I learned that every explanation costs something. Every defense leaks power. Every reaction feeds the very thing trying to provoke it. So I stopped. I didn't explain, I didn't beg, I didn't react, and they kept talking. At first, it felt unnatural, uncomfortable, like holding your breath underwater while your body screams for air. Every instinct told me to respond, to correct the narrative, to defend my name, to prove my intentions. But instincts aren't wisdom. Instincts are habits, and I was breaking one. I was breaking the habit of giving access to my inner world, because that's what speech is when it's uncontrolled. Access. Every word you give away reveals where you stand, what hurts you, what you value, what can be used against you. Silence denies that access, and denial is power. I realized something most people never do. Talking feels strong. Silence is stronger. Talking feels like control because it's visible. Silence actually controls the room because it forces others to fill the void. People hate empty space. It unsettles them. It makes them nervous. It makes them reveal things they didn't intend to. So when I stopped speaking, they didn't stop. They filled the silence with themselves. And I watched. Speech wastes energy. Observation multiplies it. Every sentence they threw into the air gave me information. Every rant revealed insecurity indicated by volume. Every insult exposed a pressure point. Loud people don't speak because they're confident. They speak because they're afraid of being ignored, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of losing control of the story. Silence terrifies them. Because silence doesn't reassure, silence doesn't applaud, silence doesn't argue back, silence just waits. And waiting is lethal to fragile egos. I didn't explain, I didn't beg, I didn't react, and they kept talking. They talked to provoke me, talked to shame me, talked to pull me back into a game I had already stopped playing. They tried mockery first. When that didn't work, they tried pity. When pity failed, they tried anger. And when anger failed, they tried rewriting history. Silence defeated all of it, because silence doesn't need consistency. It doesn't need justification. It doesn't contradict itself. It just remains. And remaining is unbearable to people who need constant feedback to exist. They started telling on themselves. The louder they got, the clearer it became. They needed me to respond. They needed my reaction to validate their importance. Without it, their words hung in the air unanswered, unconfirmed, unnecessary, and that drove them insane. Because when you don't react, you don't validate, and when you don't validate, you strip power. Silence became a weapon the moment I stopped using it defensively. At first, I was silent because I was tired. Then I was silent because I was hurt. Then I was silent because I understood. I understood that restraint is not weakness. Restraint is selection. It's deciding what deserves your energy and what doesn't. I wasn't quiet because I had nothing to say. I was quiet because nothing they said deserved a response. That distinction changes everything. Power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't rush. It doesn't plead. It doesn't over-explain. Power waits. Power listens. Power moves only when the outcome is inevitable. Loud people reveal fear. Fear of being irrelevant. Fear of losing influence. Fear of being exposed. They fill the air with noise to drown out the truth they don't want to face. Silent people gather leverage. They gather patterns. They gather motives. They gather timing. They learn when to speak and when silence will do more damage than any sentence ever could. I watched how quickly confidence decayed without an audience, how insults lost their edge without reaction, how narratives collapsed without opposition. Because arguments require two participants, I refused to be one. I didn't explain, I didn't beg, I didn't react, and they kept talking. They talked themselves into corners, contradicted their own stories, exposed their intentions, showed their desperation, and I stayed still. Stillness is unsettling. It forces people to confront their own noise, and most people don't like what they hear when no one interrupts them. Silence gave me distance. Distance gave me clarity. Clarity gave me control. I realized that every time I stayed quiet, I was conserving something rare, authority. Not authority granted by others, authority taken through discipline. I wasn't surrendering ground. I was letting them walk onto unstable terrain, because the more they talked, the more predictable they became. Predictability is weakness. Silence removes predictability. They never knew what I was thinking, never knew what I knew, never knew when or if I would speak, and that uncertainty haunted them. Silence turned their confidence into paranoia. They began to question themselves. Why isn't he responding? Does he know something? Did I say too much? Those questions did more damage than any insult ever could, because silence doesn't attack. It waits for people to unravel themselves, and they did. I learned that control doesn't come from dominating conversations. It comes from deciding which conversations are worth having at all. I learned that you don't win by being louder. You win by being untouchable. Silence made me untouchable, not emotionally, strategically. They couldn't provoke me into mistakes, couldn't bait me into contradictions, couldn't corner me with their words, because I gave them nothing to work with, no explanations to twist, no reactions to exploit, no confessions to weaponize, just quiet, steady, unmoving. I didn't explain, I didn't beg, I didn't react, and they kept talking, until talking became exposure, until noise became confession, until silence became judgment. That's when I understood. Silence isn't the absence of power, it's power that doesn't need to prove itself. It's a blade kept in its sheath until the moment matters. It's pressure applied without force. It's the art of letting others destroy their own credibility while you remain intact. They wanted noise. They wanted drama. They wanted me emotional, reactive, desperate to be understood. I gave them none of it. I gave them distance. And in that distance I grew, not louder, sharper, more precise, more controlled. Silence didn't make me smaller. It refined me. It stripped away impulsiveness, stripped away neediness, stripped away the illusion that I owed anyone an explanation. I realized something finally. People who demand explanations don't want understanding. They want control. And silence denies them that. So let them talk. Let them speculate. Let them accuse. Let them shout into the void they created. because every word they waste I convert into leverage. I didn't explain, I didn't beg, I didn't react, and they kept talking. Until silence stood taller than any voice in the room. Until restraint became dominance. Until quiet became undeniable. Silence was never my wound, it was my weapon, and I learned how to wield it. I learned something dangerous by saying nothing. Not all confessions come with shaking hands or broken voices. Some arrive dressed as confidence. Some arrive smiling. Some arrive loud. They don't realize it at first. They think silence is weakness. They think quiet means ignorance. They think if no one stops them, no one sees them. So they talked and talked and talked. People grow arrogant when they believe they're unchallenged. Egos swell when no one pushes back. Masks loosen when applause feels guaranteed. I watched it happen, slow, predictable, beautiful. At first, they were careful, measured, words chosen like chess moves. But silence makes people impatient. It makes them uneasy. It makes them overcompensate. They wanted a reaction. They wanted denial. They wanted resistance. I gave them nothing, no explanation, no defense, no correction, just stillness. And in that stillness, they filled the space with themselves. Listen closely. People don't lie all at once. They leak. A contradiction here, a justification there, a story that changes just enough to expose its seams. Lies are heavy. They require maintenance. They demand memory, consistency, effort. Truth doesn't, so I waited. And they kept building on rotten foundations. One sentence didn't match the last. One claim erased the one before it. They forgot who they were pretending to be. Confidence turned sloppy. Certainty turned aggressive. They started repeating themselves, raising their voice, over-explaining. That's when I knew, because innocent people don't rehearse. They don't preempt accusations that haven't been made. They don't argue with ghosts. Guilty minds do. Silence invites projection. That's the part no one warns you about. When you don't speak, people hear themselves louder. When you don't accuse, they accuse for you. When you don't attack, they reveal what they fear being attacked for. Watch carefully. They'll tell you what they are by what they assume you think. They called me manipulative because manipulation was their language. They called me selfish because selfishness justified their choices. They called me cold because empathy would have exposed them. People accuse you of what they are guilty of. Every time, without fail, they pointed fingers to hide their hands. They rewrote history to survive the present. They spoke in absolutes to avoid specifics. And still, I said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, but because silence was doing the work better. Silence doesn't interrupt, it records. Silence doesn't argue, it archives. Silence doesn't defend, it lets patterns speak. And patterns always speak. Arrogance has a rhythm, deception has a cadence, hypocrisy has a tone. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. They contradicted themselves publicly. Privately, casually, they forgot who they told which version to. They mixed truths with lies and hoped no one would notice. But I noticed. I noticed how the story changed depending on the audience, how morals bent when convenience demanded it, how principles disappeared when pressure arrived. They preached loyalty while practicing betrayal. They demanded honesty while living on omissions. They claimed virtue while negotiating with their conscience. And they thought they were winning. That's the funniest part. They thought silence meant surrender. They thought absence meant defeat. They thought control belonged to the loudest voice in the room. They were wrong. Power isn't in accusation, it's in observation. I didn't accuse them, I let them indict themselves. Every word they spoke became evidence. Every explanation became a motive. Every outburst became confirmation. They started defending actions no one questioned, justifying choices no one challenged, explaining behavior no one asked about. That's not confidence, that's fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being understood, fear that someone somewhere is paying attention. And I was. Silence sharpened my mind. It separated emotion from information. It turned noise into data. I stopped listening to what they said. I listened to when they said it, why they said it, who they said it to. I watched who they protected, who they blamed, who they threw under the bus when pressure arrived. Character doesn't appear in speeches, it appears in patterns. And their patterns were loud. They wanted validation, not truth. Victory, not integrity. Control, not resolution. They spoke in circles to avoid straight lines. They reframed guilt as misunderstanding. They reframed harm as necessity. And every time they revealed more. Silence stripped away their audience. Without applause, they panicked. Without resistance, they spiraled. Because people who are right don't need to perform. They don't need to dominate conversations. They don't need to crush others to stand tall. Only fragile egos do that. Only unstable identities do that. Only liars do that. So I let them talk. I let them exhaust themselves. I let them contradict yesterday with today. I let them expose tomorrow before it arrived. I didn't chase justice. I didn't demand accountability. I let time do what time always does. Time pressures lies. Time rewards consistency. Time suffocates deception. They slipped because they couldn't stop talking. They revealed motives by over-explaining outcomes. They admitted intent without realizing it. That's the danger of arrogance. You start believing your own narrative too much. You stop checking yourself. You assume everyone else is stupid. And that assumption is fatal. Silence is a mirror, and not everyone likes what they see. Some people break when confronted. Others break when ignored. They broke themselves. And when the moment finally came, when the truth stood undeniable, when their words stacked against them like witnesses, I didn't smile. I didn't gloat, I just understood. Understood that restraint is dominance, that patience is power. That silence, used correctly, is a weapon sharper than accusation. I didn't need to destroy them. They did that on their own. I didn't need to expose them. They stepped into the light willingly. I didn't need revenge. I had clarity. And clarity is irreversible. So listen to me now. If someone is truly innocent, they won't panic in your quiet. If someone is honest, they won't fear your stillness. If someone is solid, they won't collapse without an audience. But if they talk too much, defend too hard, explain too often, pay attention. Because somewhere in their words, they are confessing. And you don't need to say a thing to hear it. Just listen, just watch, just let them speak. They always do. There was a time I wanted justice. Not loudly, not theatrically. Quietly, I wanted balance. I wanted the scales to notice the weight they ignored. I wanted the universe to admit what happened mattered. I told myself it was noble, that it was strength disguised as patience. That wanting fairness meant I still believed in order. But listen to me carefully. Justice requires engagement, and engagement requires equality. And I realized something that changed everything. I was never their equal in intention. They wanted comfort. I wanted truth. They wanted to survive consequences. I wanted meaning. Justice demands you stand in the same arena as those who wronged you. It demands debate, arguments, explanations. It demands you care what they say back. And one day, something inside me went quiet. I understood that arguing with someone who has already decided to misunderstand you is not morality. It's charity, it's exhaustion, it's self-betrayal dressed as virtue. Justice assumes both sides respect the same rules, the same definitions, the same reality. But what do you do when they do? What do you do when truth is negotiable to them? When accountability is a foreign language? When fairness only applies if it benefits their reflection? You don't fight, you withdraw, because justice isn't free. It costs attention, energy, time, and I had been paying for something that was never going to pay me back. I kept replaying conversations that would never happen, apologies that would never come, admissions they were incapable of giving. I wanted them to understand. That was my mistake. Understanding is a gift, and not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Justice would have required me to keep knocking on doors that were already locked from the inside. It would have required me to keep proving pain to people invested in denying it. That's not justice. That's humiliation. So I stopped, not angrily, not dramatically. Coldly, I didn't want revenge. Revenge still ties you to the past. Revenge means they still occupy space in your mind. Revenge means your future is reacting to their shadow. I didn't want that. I wanted clarity. Clarity doesn't argue. It observes. Clarity doesn't negotiate. It concludes. Clarity doesn't need agreement. It doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't need applause. It just sees. And once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. I saw that justice would require me to keep explaining my humanity to people who benefited from ignoring it. I saw that fairness would require me to lower myself into conversations designed to drain me. I saw that staying morally engaged with them kept me emotionally enslaved. So I detached, not because I stopped caring about right and wrong, but because I stopped confusing justice with validation. Wanting justice was still wanting them to admit I mattered. Wanting fairness was still wanting recognition. Wanting acknowledgement was still wanting permission. And I was done asking. The moment I stopped wanting justice, I felt lighter, not relieved, unburdened, because justice ties you to outcomes you can't control. Clarity frees you to act without consensus. I didn't forgive them. Forgiveness still centers them. I didn't condemn them. Condemnation still invests energy. I categorized them. That was the shift. You stop asking, why would they do this? And start saying, this is who they are. No more puzzles. No more theories. No more late-night negotiations with memory. Just acceptance. And acceptance is not weakness. Acceptance is the blade. Once you accept that someone cannot meet you at the level of integrity you require, the conversation ends. No justice needed, no closure demanded, no final speech. Silence becomes permanent. I stopped seeking fairness because fairness would have meant meeting them halfway. And halfway was already too far into territory that didn't respect me. Justice is a social construct. Clarity is a personal one. Justice needs systems. Clarity needs honesty. Justice waits for timing. Clarity moves immediately. When you no longer seek justice, you stop being reactive. You stop hoping reality will bend. You stop bleeding in public. You become precise. You choose where your energy goes, who has access, who gets proximity, and most importantly, who doesn't. I didn't want revenge, I wanted clarity. And clarity made one thing undeniable. I was never meant to win their acknowledgement. I was meant to outgrow their relevance. The cold calm that followed wasn't emptiness, it was focus. I no longer rehearsed arguments. I no longer imagined alternate endings. I no longer waited for the world to catch up. I moved, quietly, deliberately, without announcement. That's the real transformation no one talks about. Not the scream, not the rage, not the dramatic exit. The moment you stop wanting justice is the moment you stop needing anyone to understand why you left. You don't explain, you don't justify, you don't revisit, you simply don't return. And that is transcendence. Because when you no longer seek fairness from the unfair, you are no longer governed by their limits. You are free. I didn't decide to become silent. Silence decided to stay. At first, it was survival, a shelter, a pause between blows, but somewhere along the way it stopped being a reaction and became my shape. I stopped filling the air, stopped correcting assumptions, stopped rushing to explain my intentions, and the world didn't get quieter, it got louder. Because when you no longer rush to be understood, people start revealing how desperate they are to be believed. I remained silent. They unraveled. Silence didn't erase me. It outlined me. It sharpened the edges of my presence until every room felt smaller when I entered. Not because I demanded attention, but because I didn't need it. They expected noise, defensiveness, emotion. They expected me to react. And when I didn't, something in them panicked. You see, noise is a negotiation. Silence is a verdict. When I stopped explaining myself, people started explaining themselves. Filling gaps I never asked them to fill. Confessing to accusations I never made. I remained silent. They unraveled. They called it cold. They called it arrogance. They called it distance. But distance was the point, because proximity had cost me too much. Silence became my identity not because I hid behind it, but because I grew into it. It wasn't absence, it was density. Every word I didn't speak gained weight. Every pause carried intent. I watched how people leaned forward, uncomfortable, trying to read me, trying to provoke a reaction, trying to crack the surface. And the more still I became, the more exposed they felt. A storm doesn't announce itself. It doesn't negotiate with the sky. It arrives, and everything else adjusts. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't harden my face. I softened. And that terrified them, because rage is predictable. Silence is not. Rage gives warning. Silence gives consequences. I remained silent. They unraveled. They stumbled over their words, over-explained, over-promised. They projected motives onto me, invented narratives, assigned me intentions I never claimed. And in doing so, they told me everything I needed to know. Silence became my identity when I realized I no longer needed to be heard to be understood. The right people felt me. The wrong people feared me. Calm became my authority, not the calm of surrender. The calm of certainty. I no longer flinched at accusations, didn't rush to defend my name, because names mean nothing to those who have already decided who you are. I let them talk, I let them speculate, let them assume. Every word they spoke without my interruption tightened the noose of their own credibility. I remained silent. They unraveled. There is something deeply unsettling about a person who doesn't argue back, who doesn't plead their case, who doesn't chase approval. It forces people to confront the possibility that their opinion doesn't matter, and that realization is unbearable to the insecure. Silence stripped away my need to perform morality, to prove goodness, to display intention. I didn't need to be seen as right, I needed to be aligned, so I stopped reacting. Reaction is submission to external rhythm. Silence is choosing your own tempo. I became slower, deliberate, every movement intentional, every word rare, and rarity creates value. They leaned in closer, desperate for insight, for confirmation, for denial. I gave them nothing. And in that nothing, they saw themselves clearly for the first time. A judge never raises his voice. He lets the evidence speak. I wasn't cold. I was finished explaining. There's a difference. Silence stopped being something I used and became something I was. It followed me into conversations, into decisions, into conflict, not passive, poised, not withdrawn, grounded. People began to hesitate around me, to second-guess their words, because they could no longer read my reactions. And when people can't read you, they project their fears onto you. They assume calculation, control, judgment, and maybe they were right, because silence teaches you how much power exists in restraint. Speech spends energy. Silence stores it. While they exhausted themselves explaining, I conserved. While they reacted emotionally, I observed. While they fought to control perception, I controlled myself. I remained silent. They unraveled. They mistook my calm for indifference, until they realized I remembered everything. Silence has a memory. It records tone, timing, patterns, every contradiction, every shift in allegiance. When I finally spoke, not often, not loudly, it landed with precision. Because silence makes truth heavier, I didn't need to threat. My restraint did that for me. I didn't need to dominate. My presence did that for me. People sensed it before they understood it. A pressure, a gravity. Silence became my identity when I no longer feared being misunderstood. Misunderstanding stopped being a wound and became a filter. Those who rushed to judge revealed their limits. Those who stayed quiet with me proved their depth. The rest, noise. I stopped correcting lies told about me, because lies require belief to survive, and I wasn't feeding them anymore. I remained silent. They unraveled. They argued with shadows, with versions of me that only existed in their guilt. I watched, not with cruelty, with clarity. Silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. You just have to let people speak long enough to reveal them. When silence becomes your identity, you stop chasing control. You let others hand it to you unknowingly. You stop asserting power. You let absence create it. And that is the final evolution. Not the roar, not the conquest. The stillness, the unshakable center. The presence that doesn't explain itself. I remained silent, and they unraveled. Not because I attacked them, but because they couldn't stand the mirror I became. Silence didn't weaken me. It crowned me. I learned something they never will. Power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't clear its throat. It doesn't demand the room. It doesn't beg to be seen. Real power arrives quietly and stays. I didn't need to prove anything, because proof is for the uncertain. The moment you feel the need to explain your strength, you've already placed yourself beneath the listener. I stopped doing that. I stopped listing achievements, stopped defending choices, stopped narrating my intentions like they were on trial. Silence handled it better. They mistook that for weakness at first. They always do, because loudness has trained them to confuse volume with authority, movement with momentum, noise with dominance. But noise fades, echoes die, silence doesn't. Silence accumulates. I didn't need to prove anything. Their reactions proved everything. Every pause I held stretched their nerves tighter. Every unanswered glance grew heavier than any argument. Fear lives in unanswered spaces. Not in threats, not in insults, in uncertainty. They couldn't predict me anymore. And unpredictability is the most destabilizing force there is. I didn't posture, I didn't boast, I didn't announce a plan. I let absence do the talking. And absence is terrifying to those who rely on attention to exist. You see loud victories burn fast. They impress, they trend, and then they vanish. Quiet victories don't sparkle. They settle, they become permanent. They rewrite the environment so thoroughly that people forget it was ever different. That's real power. I watched people try to provoke me into explaining myself, into reacting, into lowering myself to their tempo. They wanted confirmation, validation, opposition. I gave them nothing, and that nothing consumed them. They talked louder, moved faster, overreached. Because when power doesn't announce itself, the insecure try to expose it. They poke, they test, they dare, not realizing that every test reveals more about them than it ever will about me. I didn't need to prove anything. Their reactions proved everything. They measured themselves against me without my consent and found the distance unbearable. I stayed composed. Composure is dominance without aggression. Anyone can shout, anyone can threaten, anyone can posture. Very few can remain calm while others unravel. That calm is not mercy, it's mastery. I learned to let people talk themselves into corners, to let them overplay their hands, because desperation always leaks through speech. Power doesn't need to rush, it has time. I stopped correcting misunderstandings, because misunderstandings reveal alignment. Those who wanted clarity asked quietly. Those who wanted control accused loudly. I watched who panicked. I watched who waited. The difference told me everything. They expected confrontation, resistance, drama. They prepared for a battle I never entered, because the strongest position is the one that doesn't require engagement. I didn't need to win loudly. I needed to endure quietly. And endurance terrifies those built on performance. They rely on applause, on reaction, on visible impact. Take that away and they collapse under the weight of their own emptiness. Fear grows in unanswered spaces. When you don't explain your motives, people invent them. And those inventions always expose their own shadows. They accused me of manipulation, control, coldness, not because I was those things, but because those were the tools they would have used. Projection is confession. I didn't need to confront them. I let their language indict them. I let their urgency betray them. I let their fear announce itself for me. Power doesn't announce itself. It waits, it observes, it chooses when to move. I stopped reacting to disrespect, because reaction is acknowledgement. I stopped defending my name, because names belong to those who speak them. I focused on position. Position doesn't need words. Position changes outcomes. I didn't need to prove anything. Their reactions proved everything. They watched me closely, too closely. Every move I didn't make became suspicious. Every silence became loaded. And that constant vigilance exhausted them, because they were fighting a war that existed only in their minds. I stayed still. Stillness is unsettling. It forces others to carry the motion. It forces them to reveal intention. Power doesn't chase control. It creates gravity. People orbit it without realizing why. They slow their speech, measure their words. They feel watched even when they are. Because power doesn't need to be present to be felt. It lingers. I learned that dominance isn't about being seen. It's about being unavoidable, even in absence, especially in absence. They whispered about me, speculated, tried to map my silence like it was a puzzle they could solve. They failed. Because silence isn't a puzzle, it's a boundary, and boundaries don't negotiate. I didn't need to threaten consequences. My restraint implied them. I didn't need to promise retaliation. My memory did that for me. Quiet people remember everything. Loud people forget what they said 5 minutes ago. That alone creates imbalance. I didn't need to prove anything. Their reactions proved everything. They flinched before I moved, explained before I asked, apologized without accusation. That's when I understood power had shifted, not because I seized it, but because I stopped giving mine away. Every explanation is a concession. Every defense is a plea. I withdrew both, and the room adjusted. Power doesn't announce itself. It's recognized, not with applause, with caution, with hesitation, with fear disguised as respect. I didn't need to raise my voice. I lowered it, and suddenly everyone leaned in. That's dominance. I didn't need to speed up. I slowed down. And suddenly everyone waited. That's control. I didn't need to claim authority. I embodied it. And suddenly no one questioned it. I didn't need to prove anything. Their reactions proved everything. They watched me leave conversations unfinished, questions unanswered, and those unfinished moments haunted them. Because power isn't about closure, it's about leverage. And silence is leverage refined. I became inevitable, not because I threatened the future, but because I stopped explaining it. Power doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly and stays long after the noise is gone. And by the time they realize it's there, it's already too late to challenge it. They didn't notice at first. They never do. A glance missed. A pause too long. A word left unsaid. Small cracks in the floor of their certainty. Invisible at first. Insignificant until gravity worked. I remained silent. And silence is heavier than accusation. At first, they tried to fill the gaps. Explanations spilled from nervous lips. Sudden kindness they thought would cover their tracks. Defensive smiles, forced laughter, exaggerated gestures. They assumed I was unaware. They assumed I was indifferent. They assumed too much. They forgot one thing. Silence doesn't forget. Silence remembers every slight, every betrayal, every lie whispered in shadow, every glance meant to wound, every casual dismissal. it waits, it watches, and then it moves. I remained silent, and they began to notice. Eyes darted where once they stared confidently. Words stumbled in mouths that had always controlled conversation. Confidence slipped like sand through fingers. They felt it before they understood it. A shift, a hesitation, an instinctive recognition that the balance had changed. I didn't have to speak. My silence spoke louder than any accusation could, more accurate, more piercing, irrevocable, like prisoners realizing the cell door was always locked. Like an audience noticing the execution already happened, the weight of inevitability settling into their chest. They tried to act normal, feigning ease, testing the waters, prodding for a hint of concession. Nothing. I remained silent, and that silence became a mirror. They saw themselves in it. Every fear, every insecurity, every miscalculation they'd assumed invisible. And panic began to bloom. Not the panic of discovery, but the panic of realization. They had already lost. Before they understood the game had even started, I didn't announce judgment. I didn't declare consequence. I simply didn't respond. And the absence of reaction told them more than words ever could. They began to explain, frantic, overcompensating explanations, trying to justify every past act, every careless word, trying to reconstruct moments I had already catalogued and judged. Too late, the ledger was complete, the verdict already settled. Their kindness became brittle. Their flattery hollow, their apologies meaningless, because silence waits for truth, and truth never needs reinforcement. I watched their patterns unravel. The cracks grew faster than they could repair them. They panicked in gestures, in tones, in glances. Desperate for control they no longer had. I didn't speak, I didn't accuse, I didn't act. And yet everything I needed to say was already understood. Judgment isn't a scream. Judgment isn't immediate. It's slow, quiet, unforgiving. And when it strikes in a space they cannot reach. They tried to negotiate, to charm, to manipulate, but the hour had passed. The moment had come and gone. I remained silent, and in that silence, power revealed itself. They realized they had exposed everything. Without me ever lifting a finger, without me ever raising my voice, they realized I had been listening, I had been watching, and nothing escaped notice. Their smiles faltered, their confidence shattered. They fumbled for excuses. And even the excuses betrayed them. Because when silence is judgment, explanation becomes confession. Speech becomes evidence. Movement becomes revelation. They understood too late. I didn't have to argue. I didn't have to confront. I didn't have to avenge. I waited. And time did the work I never needed to do. I remained silent. They unraveled. Every word they spoke revealed their guilt. Every gesture revealed their fear. Every attempt to regain composure revealed how completely powerless they had become. They were caught in the mirror of their own truth, and the mirror does not lie. I didn't have to intervene. I didn't have to act. The world had already responded to my restraint, because silence is not weakness. Silence is inevitability. It reveals the liars. It exposes the hypocrites. It shatters illusions without a single blow. And they realized it. Too late, I remained silent. And in that silence, they understood the game had ended. The verdict had been delivered, and I had never needed to lift my voice to claim victory. Because true judgment is quiet, it waits, it observes, and it strikes without warning, without mercy, without need for applause. They realized finally that my silence was never absence, it was judgment itself. And when they understood that it was already over, I said nothing. And yet everything was laid bare. You assumed that silence was weakness. That indifference meant surrender, that my lips sealed consent. You were wrong. I never attacked, I never confronted, I never sought to destroy. And still you fell apart. I said nothing. You showed everything, every lie you thought hidden, every cruelty you imagined invisible, every selfish choice you hoped I would overlook. All of it exposed. I watched, I waited. And the truth unfolded without my hand ever touching it. Because exposure is more devastating than punishment. It doesn't bruise. It doesn't wound superficially. It unravels the foundation. I said nothing. You showed everything. You revealed your fear, your arrogance, your deceit, not in dramatic outbursts, not in bold confessions, but in whispers, in gestures, in the subtle cracks of your composure. You thought I would respond, that I would make the judgment, that I would mete out consequence. I didn't. I let the mirror do its work. And the reflection destroyed you faster than any blow could. I said nothing. You showed everything. You revealed the truth of your character to yourself. Not to me, not to the world, but to yourself. And that revelation is merciless. It cannot be undone. It cannot be denied. I watched as confidence eroded, as certainty faltered, as every calculated move betrayed anxiety and guilt. The masks slipped, the excuses faltered, the arrogance rotted from the inside out. I said nothing. You showed everything. I never needed to strike. You were already your own undoing. Every deception, every cruelty, every lie you carried like armor, it was pierced not by force, but by my silence. I said nothing. You showed everything. And that is the difference between punishment and revelation. Punishment leaves scars. Revelation leaves the soul bare. I didn't speak. I didn't act. I didn't impose consequence. You imposed it on yourself. Every word you said, every action you took, every choice you believed was hidden, it became evidence. And you unwittingly became the prosecutor and the defendant in the trial you never knew you were in. I said nothing. You showed everything. You revealed your priorities, your weaknesses, your hypocrisy. You exposed the limits of your courage, the depth of your betrayal, the breadth of your ambition, all without me ever raising my hand. Because power doesn't demand acknowledgement. It doesn't need a stage. It doesn't need violence. It waits. And truth always arrives. I said nothing. You showed everything. And the world saw, even those who had doubted, even those who had feared, even those who had assumed you were untouchable. They saw your unraveling, not because I tore it apart, but because your own actions made it impossible to hide. I said nothing. You showed everything. There is a cruelty in exposure that punishment can never match. It doesn't hurt the flesh. It corrodes the mind. It undermines confidence. It dissolves influence. It renders all pretense meaningless. I said nothing. You showed everything. You realized it too late. By then the damage was done. Not by me, by you. Every mask you wore fell away. Every word you spoke betrayed intention. Every gesture disclosed the truth. I said nothing. You showed everything. And in that revelation there is finality, no recovery, no apology, no redress, only the quiet acknowledgement that the truth was always there, and you were powerless to hide it. I said nothing. You showed everything. You exposed the limits of your control, the hollowness of your authority, the fragility of your composure. I didn't impose judgment. You imposed it upon yourself, and in that I found clarity. The lesson I intended to teach required no action on my part, only patience, only observation, only silence. I said nothing. You showed everything. You believed punishment would hurt me. You believed confrontation would shake me. You believed action was necessary to assert dominance. I proved you wrong without moving a muscle, without uttering a word, without declaring intention. I said nothing. You showed everything. And the truth is always heavier than punishment, always more lasting, always more devastating. I said nothing. You showed everything. The moment you understood it, the moment it struck you that I never needed to act, was the moment the scales tipped entirely. I didn't punish. I didn't condemn. I didn't retaliate. I simply existed. And your own choices delivered the verdict. I said nothing. You showed everything. And now the lesson lingers. It will follow you. Haunt your confidence, unravel every assumption, because exposure is inevitable, because truth cannot be silenced, because silence, when wielded with patience, becomes the most fearsome weapon. I said nothing. You showed everything, and the world watched. I rise without noise, not because I have nothing to say, not because I am unaware of the chaos behind me, but because noise is the refuge of the weak. Let them talk, let them explain, let them remember. I rise while the world scrambles for understanding, while they search for answers in the ruins they themselves created, while they clutch at excuses and justifications. I rise without announcement, without applause, without witnesses. Victory is mine before recognition ever arrives. Triumph does not require fanfare. Dominance does not demand consent. I rise without noise. They believed they mattered. They believed their words, their power, their influence could sway me. They believed their presence imposed significance. They were wrong. Let them talk. Let them explain. Let them remember. Every gesture, every plea, every hurried attempt to reclaim control is meaningless. I do not engage. I do not justify. I do not lower myself to their understanding. I rise while they stumble in the shadows of their own failures. I rise while they measure loss in the echo of my silence. I rise while they remember that the hand they sought to strike is already gone. I rise without noise. No victory speech will ever leave my lips. No forgiveness will be granted. No acknowledgement will temper the weight of what they have learned. Let them talk. Let them explain. Let them remember. The world is filled with those who demand spectacle. They measure strength in volume. They mistake motion for mastery. They confuse struggle with skill. I do not. I rise above it all, above the noise, above the anger, above the fleeting judgments that crowd their minds. They fall while thinking they have stood. They stumble while assuming they have led. They remember too late that the mountain cannot be climbed from below. I rise without noise. Silence is my companion. Patience is my blade. Observation is my armor. Let them talk. Let them explain. Let them remember. Each memory of me will strike them harder than any confrontation. Each recollection will remind them of what they lacked, discipline, clarity, control, and the cold inevitability of my presence. I rise while they fracture under the weight of their own making. I rise while they seek to comprehend the incomprehensible. I rise while they realize that power is not earned in moments of spectacle. Power is claimed in the stillness before recognition. I rise without noise. And as I rise, they cannot help but look back, cannot help but measure the distance, cannot help but remember who they truly faced. Let them talk, let them explain, let them remember. I leave no threat, I leave no promise, I leave no room for negotiation. The lesson is absolute. The conclusion inescapable, the presence undeniable. Silence is my language, observation my counsel, elevation my victory. I rise without noise, and in that rise everything changes, not because I acted, not because I spoke, but because I became, because I exist, unmoved by expectation, unfettered by opinion, unbroken by history. Let them talk, let them explain, let them remember. Their voices echo in empty rooms, their explanations crumble under scrutiny. Their memories serve as monuments to failure. I rise without noise, and when they finally grasp the truth, it is too late. The moment has passed. The lesson is learned, not in confrontation, not in vengeance, but in the unyielding, unapologetic assertion of being. I rise without noise. No applause marks the occasion. No witness records the triumph. No celebration confirms the dominance, because silence is enough, because restraint is enough, because the weight of power speaks louder than any speech. Let them talk, let them explain, let them remember, and I watch, unmoved, unshaken, absolute. Every attempt to understand me will fail. Every question they pose will remain unanswered. Every hope for closure will be denied. I rise without noise, and in that rise they fall remembering. Not because I struck, not because I judged, but because I simply became the force they could never anticipate, the presence they could never predict, the silence they could never endure. Let them talk, let them explain. Let them remember, and I remain silent, unchallenged, unbroken, absolute.